Thanks to everyone for coming. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to share this framework, but before we do, here are our sponsors. I've loved coming to Product Camp over the years because you get to learn a lot of new ideas and share ideas, and so hopefully this talk will be one of those. But very thankful to all the sponsors and for this event, and it's been very helpful for me in my career. Okay, so I work for General Motors, and I work in this innovation strategy division. And so our mission is to create new lines of business that are adjacent to our core. So it's things that we're not already doing. It's like new markets, new products, new ideas. And so kind of by definition, I'm always in this discovery phase, validation phase. Is this something we should be doing? So I've been doing this for 4 years, and I've looked at hundreds of ideas, done dozens of launches. We've had some big successes. One of our products that came from this group hit $1 billion in revenue in just 3 years. So we're really proud of that. But this is kind of the core of what I do and we do in our group is finding these new ideas, validating them, are they any good or not, launching them, and then getting product market fit. So in my PM world, I've always loved I would love to have full autonomy and be able to do what I want. But what I have found since being in this role is this is really, really hard because you have this white blank whiteboard that you could just do anything you want, and to know is this a good idea? Should we do this? What exactly should it look like? This is really, really hard. So I love learning new strategies. These are some of my favorite books that I use, and I kind of hacked together my own framework. But it's still a challenge to always learn and adapt to what's best for this situation. So I'm always eager to hear new ideas and always keep the learning up. One of the channels I really love is Gary Tan. Does anyone follow his? Yeah, he has some really good stuff. He gets in more nuanced startup stuff, but he has some really good just general product principles, and so I watched him. But in one of his talks, he interviewed Dr. Amy Jo Kim, and she went in through her framework and methodology, and there was really good stuff in it. So I learned more about her, and I got her book, and it's called Game Thinking. And basically, she has a PhD in behavioral science. She worked as a game designer for many years, and then she started to notice these patterns, the same patterns that create highly engaging games can be applied to products. So she's then developed this product consulting practice and has worked on some pretty big hits. So not only just in the big hits in the gaming industry, but she's worked for Netflix, Happify, just a lot of great success with this framework. So I really got into it, and I read the book, and it's has really good stuff. And on the surface, it's not really that different. This looks like design thinking, right? So very many of the things I love, explore the problem space first, diverge, converge, solution space, test your ideas, et cetera, et cetera. But she has some really good upgrades to this. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about this whole framework, but I'm going to talk about 3 things that I got that I think this is somewhat novel and are really good upgrades to how you do design thinking, how you validate new ideas. And it's very applicable to, are you developing a new product? Are you developing new features? Are you trying to enhance a new system? Are you trying to create a highly engageable product? Okay, so the 3 things I'm going to talk about is her concept she calls super fans, which are being able to get down to a narrow market and find your early adopters, building a mastery path and habit building learning loops into your product, and then play testing your ideas to validate. So I'm going to talk about those are the 3 things that I'm going to get into today. So number 1, study the habits and needs of your high needs superfans. So in diffusion of innovation, this idea got I think this is where this chart originated from, that new products take on this like bell curve where there's an early adopter market, then it hits mainstream, and then it starts to go into the laggards. And then in crossing the chasm, it goes into that usually there's this chasm that translates between early adopters and then the late stage market. But both of them hit on this, like you start with an early market, start with high need niche market, and then expand from there. So who is familiar with this? Anybody familiar with this? Who in their job, like they live this, they actually do that. This is your modus operandi. Like, so I've understood this and I've gotten it, but like, how do you do that? Like, how do you exactly do you do that? Do you go find those people to find that? And it's kind of like, we've done it, but sometimes it happens very smoothly and organically, and then sometimes it's very hard to define how to do that. So I love this quote: build something 100 people love, not something 1 million people kind of like. And like, start there, build something small, a niche market, and get to love first, and then start expanding out. So these questions are hard to answer. And so when I found in her book, she addresses this. This has been like, when she's designing games, she developed this system for finding those people. And so the main tool is something called the superfan funnel. And basically you have like a 3-stage approach where you find people and you're actually screening the market for these people. You identify who most has this problem, and you try to look for 4 characteristics. Number one, they have the problem you're wanting to solve. They know they have the problem and it's something that's top of mind for them. They're trying to solve the problem and they're actually seeking out current options, and then they're dissatisfied with the options. So I've seen versions of these ideas before, but like, this is a pretty good list for like, who's your early adopters? Like, do they have these characteristics? The other thing is however you go out, if you go outside of the building, find these people, but you start funneling people through, and you actually send them through this recruiting message. And what you do is you have this top part in which you're alluding to, you're not going into details of the exact problem you're looking to solve, but you're narrowing the market a little bit, and this has people self-screen. So hopefully you give like a little bit of information of what you're looking for, and people say, that interests me, that is me. The second part is you go with this where you kind of have this attitude like, we're performing a research study and we're looking for participants. And I have to be honest, when I first saw this, I like kind of resisted this, like doing paid research. One of the thoughts is that like, if you're solving a real problem, people shouldn't like have to, if they deeply care about it, you shouldn't have to pay them to solve the problem. Okay, so that was my first reaction. But one of the things I found going out and trying to interview people is message people and say, hey, I'm from General Motors and I'd like to talk to you about this. Like, the first reaction people have is like, you're trying to sell me something, like, no, and it's like rejection. But if you come out like, I'm performing this research study, we're gonna give you like a $50 Amazon gift card to participate in this. Are you interested? That comes at like a little bit of a different angle. And I think it doesn't break the rule where you're trying to pay people to use your product, but it's like a starter. It's like a starter tactic to get people in the door to start talking to you. Then the third part is running a superfan screener. And so you link to that. And so the superfan screener has like 2 parts to it. 3 multiple choice questions and 3 open-ended questions. And so the multiple choice, you're trying to ask questions that don't directly ask if they have the problem, but you're asking, do they have characteristics that are performing, trying to solve the problem? And then you ask open-ended questions that get people to talk about their workflow, what tactics they take to try to solve it. Okay, so you start getting responses, and like you start however you can, and that's one of the things you have to play with are your channels of how you get people to this. It could be you're actually going out interviewing people, you find someone that you think may be a candidate, and then you serve this to them, or it could just be you're posting in chat groups or on LinkedIn or in your network or friend to friend, but you start bringing people in, you start getting responses. And then what you're trying to do is you're trying to look through those responses and say, okay, these people meet these characteristics of super fans, your early adopters. So you start putting them into categories. But the other thing that happens, and so you're just trying to choose people to spend your time on to interview. But the other thing that happens is you start gathering data. And one of the tools I like to pair with this is something called a customer fit. So you have the whole world. You maybe have like a target market, but there are going to be some group of people that this is just they're too early for this. It's not a top of mind problem to solve. And then you have some people where maybe it's past. There's no problem. They've already solved it. They're not interested. But you start to develop these characteristics of this like Goldilocks where this is just right. And so you start getting this data and start filling it in. And you get this right away from the responses. The other thing you get is it starts to elicit pains and needs and jobs and habits. And this is something that she tries to look for, like these three things, like what are the pains and needs, what are the jobs to be done, and then what habits. And I'll get into this a little bit in designing your habit loop. But you start extracting these things, and then you're doing two things. You're like validating it, like are people actually finding getting elicited responses of these things, and then two, you're developing the raw materials for your solution design. So there's a process of like recording this. The next step is interviews, and that's like a whole nother tactic. But just this process of the superfan screener is like super helpful, but you're just trying to get people like, these are the right people to talk to for the interview. You're eventually gonna play test your idea as well. Okay, so that was hot tip number one. Hot tip number two is build a sticky habit stacked re-engagement loop. So the way she thinks about this is you are trying to solve a problem, and don't just think about you solve the problem, but think about put your customer in this position where they are like a pro at solving the problem. They're like a master of it. So has anyone heard of like designing for the hero's journey? Like there's this journey you go on. And so like, what does that look like when they have mastered solving that problem? And then you design a progression system that gets them there. In the heart of that is this something called a habit loop or a habit building learning loop. Okay. And this is like the engine that keeps them engaged to get them there to solving the problem and becoming a master at solving the problem. So it's based on like two fundamentals. One, as humans, we enjoy solving problems. And if it's a problem you care about, you're going to enjoy that process, and that learning is fun. Learning how to do something better that you care about is fun. The other one is that we are creatures of habits. Has anyone read any of these books? Yeah, like Atomic Habits, it seemed like that was a big deal like 3 or 4 years ago. But I remember reading it and thinking like, there's got to be a way to translate some of these concepts into like a good product experience. So she did it. She like pulled these things out. It was a pattern she already had seen. And it's really based on like this core idea of habit stacking, that there are existing habits we have automatically that you can then stack your product experience into and then start building on top of over time. So for instance, when you brush your teeth, that's might be your time when you're flossing. Like you don't think to floss, but when you're brushing your teeth, it's a habit you develop to stack that habit on top of. When you walk the dog, that may be like your cue to listen to a podcast, or going to work might be when you might do something like Duolingo. Like there's existing habits to stack on top of, and look for those and start stacking on top of. There's like within this habit building loop, there's like 4 key pieces. So there's the situational triggers, the core activity that should be engaging and pleasurable. And then there's these 2 other pieces, giving skill building feedback. And so this is where I said earlier, like the talk's not about gamification, but there are things like in apps, there's gamification, there's points and badges. And so the difference between good gamification and bad gamification is it connected to you building your skill? Is it giving you feedback on something you're trying to do, a problem you're trying to solve? And then also like the third form of this is like, are you making progress of solving that problem. And that kind of goes back to, what does it mean? Like, what are you trying to progress to? And that's where that mastery path comes from. But what is your progress in getting to a mastery state? Again, so the way I like to think about it is that habit building learning loop is like this engine that gets you to the mastery path. I will tell you so I've used this methodology, bits and pieces over maybe a dozen projects and like hardcore, like 3 projects. And every single time, like just thinking through this, our team would develop new ideas. And sometimes like we would develop new ideas thinking through this that are like way better than the first idea that we started with. But it's so powerful to like think about that, like think about how are we going to get our customer to being a master at solving their problems. All right, third tip is test your idea in rough form, low fidelity. So this is like not new if you're into like design sprints and things like that. It's like all over the place. What is new that I haven't really seen before is a lot of times you'll do is you'll like storyboard your idea out. And what she's saying is like, test that. Test like the whole experience end to end and test your storyboards with your customers. Don't just test like a feature of the idea. And think about, there's lots of different ways to test ideas, right? But they all have a purpose. And you're gonna get different information. And at the beginning of the idea, you wanna test like the whole idea, not just like a feature of the idea. And so doing this has become my like first step always. Like you'll zoom in on different features of an idea, but actually walk through the whole story of someone using your product from beginner to master. Like what does that look like? And again, like doing this, I've gotten so much like information and insights that I never would have thought. So if you think about when people use products, they're using it in their life, like in some way. And there are things that are happening before using the product, things that are happening after. There are things they're ultimately trying to accomplish. And like having that context around, you'll develop so many more insights. And so testing the whole journey at the beginning has been like mind-blowing. And I've never like really seen it. It's pretty simple. It's not like not that like amazing of an idea, but I've never really seen it like actually as a testing method to go to. So developing your story to test, you develop your core beats, and like you think of that like hero's journey of like how do you get there, and you actually tell a story that the customer goes in, and that's what you present to the customer to test. And along those each one of those story beats, you ask questions. You maybe give them a choice, like what would they do in this situation? What are you thinking about? Does this resonate with you? You actually like, I love to like give them the choice, like what would you do in this situation, and see which path they pick, and like why did they pick that path? And usually what you're doing is you're showing slides or the frames of the storyboard. And there's usually some sort of context of someone telling the story of them using it, and then some sort of context of like the product that they're doing. This is a good point. This is a good time to highlight, do this in low fidelity, right? So you don't want people commenting on the graphics that you're using or usability of the app right now. We're in like problem validation space, right? So keep this like really low fidelity. One of the hacks that I do is like sometimes I just forget the sketch, and I do what's called like a narrative storyboard test, where I just like tell the story. And a lot of times like the best graphics are in the person's mind that you're telling the story to. So like they're like visualizing themselves doing that. And so sometimes I just skip this and I use the PowerPoint just as like supporting material of a screen to show as I'm telling the story. So concept, scenarios, storyboard testing. All right. So those are the 3 things. Let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay, pretty good. So these are, from my experiences of using it, these are like 4 big takeaways. Number 1, finding the early adopters. That has always been like a struggle. Sometimes it's been easy, but this has been like magic. When I first started getting results, like I felt like I found like a cheat code or something. to find this. And so one of the things that we try to do is we try to validate our ideas, and we don't want false positives. Like, we don't want to ask leading questions that like give us only what we want to hear, but it's not really true. But before doing this, I couldn't help but we were eliminating ideas because of false negatives, that we weren't talking to the right people, we weren't talking to the market, the right market. We weren't really finding those early adopters, and so this has really helped with that, and that's just been like mind-blowingly helpful. The second is what I was speaking to earlier with the mastery path and progression. That is like one of the best design tools, and I can't tell you how many like better ideas we have found just by modifying our thinking to thinking about taking our customer on a path towards mastery. And then the third one is like, how easy is it to like just test the storyboard, and like how many insights get from actually telling the whole story and testing the whole product experience rather than just like a piece of it. And then fourth is like, this is very lean. This is like very easy to do. Maybe the first couple times you do it, it can be a little rough getting it up and going, but like it's very iterative. You can get feedback, you can change something really quick and test new ideas. And I'm all for like very lean and iterative approaches. Okay, so so those were the three big things. Superfans, use a superfan, build a habit seeking loop, and then like test your storyboards with your superfans. If you're interested in learning more, there's like this whole community out there. The book is really helpful. It has a lot of great theory mixed in with like practical tools. There is this gamethinking.io, which has classes, and it has some boot camps where you get like a little bit of help with one of these aspects, and they're usually free. Some of them are paid for. And then there's a master class. So I did this program, and she like gives you direct help, and then she has a lot of speakers that come in. So I kind of had like this full circle moment where I was a fan of Gary Tan, and then he was actually one of like the people that spoke to our class, and I got to like speak with him, so that was really cool. But she has like a great network. Yeah. And then there's a community called gschool.io that you can belong to. And then there's lots of great social media. So YouTube channels and little clips that will help you learn these ideas. If you have any questions, I'd love to connect anything about this. But that is my talk. And I think we have like a good couple minutes left. So if you have any questions, please let me know. But I just ran through that. Yes.
So have you seen product marketing successfully use this? I would think that with sales would be their customers.
Yeah, there's actually someone that she comes and speaks to our class called Bob Mesta. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he has like a jobs to be done lens to product marketing. And this is very much an approach, part of the approach. But it gets back to like, what are people trying to, what need are they trying to fulfill, understanding that. The other thing that I think this helps, honestly, is like the testing your channels, like your paths to customers. Like you start to learn where they're at, and you can expose those things in your superfan research. Bob Mesta. I think he has something called demand side sales. There you go. Yes. So when I showed like the red, yellow, green light, one of the things that we'll do is we'll say like, okay, this group of people, this characteristics, or like that customer fit diagram I showed, this group of people aren't like the super fans, but these are like the secondary and tertiary people we would go after. And so we're actually putting them in that bucket. And so when we do get to that stage, or we're testing ideas that'll attack that stage, we'll go find those people and re-engage them and test with them.
So you can test all of the
Yeah, but we don't like early stage. We're just trying to validate the idea. We'll focus on the super fans. Yeah, but that's one of the other things I love about this is this translates very well into like actually One, figuring out what your MVP should be, and then two, having this, like, you already have built this community of people to launch to. So like you actually have those people that you were testing with, you actually convert them into your first customers. So we've done that. Through this process. Yes.
I was just wondering, so being at GM at such a big company, did
Sure.
that mindset of the early adopter still help you with the process?
It does, but I think I had a slide to like eliminate the TAM thinking. Like that's hard. They don't want to do that. They want to go from like idea to like big launch in front of like, you know, the whole market, go to CES and say we're launching this big new thing. And so that is a challenge. That is a challenge with big company thinking. So it's different for each idea. Sometimes we'll have ideas and then our leaders get excited just at the idea stage. We haven't even validated it, and then it gets like millions of dollars of funding, and we haven't like actually even talked to anyone yet. And then sometimes it's the opposite, where leaders are skeptical. And so I actually like those because I really am a believer in this like stages of growth, and like your first stage is like validate, launch to a small market, and like you're going to set your product to be successful following that path. So I wouldn't say like it's hard or or easy. It really depends on like the leaders and the idea and what they get excited about. Yeah.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Go ahead. How, Ewan, how did you find out about Kim and this gaming, which is different from what you the role of the product?
I found out it from the Gary Tan channel. He has a really good interview, and if you're like slightly interested, go watch that interview. He has like a really good channel. I love like his Katamari Damacy. Have you guys seen that? Like to describe MVPs, it's really good. But I'd say check out his channel. But that's where I found it from, straight from watching that channel. Yeah.
Who at GM created like the position that you have now? Like how did that come about, do you know?
Okay, so we have a strategic leadership team, which is like the CEO and like leaders in the company, and they said the world is changing. We need to be able to compete with Silicon Valley startups. We need to like do something like that. So I worked on like the first project where they wanted to do as an experiment. I worked on that. And then I kind of got this role as like exploring other opportunities related to that product and being able to do that well. And that translated to, they said, okay, we want to do more things like that and actually have like an organization that does that. And then I got recruited to come in and help in that organization. So it got created because like our SLT says like the automotive industry is going to look way different in the next 50 years than it has in the last 100 and whatever years. And that we need to be able to compete, like to survive.
How do you think the transition from ICE to EV is going?
From ICE to EVs, I think it's getting up there. Like General Motors, we're going to have like next year like a big suite of trucks, SUVs. I think the EV infrastructure has a lot of work to do. That's like going to be a lot of the hurdles. Is that their charging infrastructure.
For long distance in Austin, it's been pretty good for many years now.
Yeah, there's still a lot of problems with like bad chargers, broken chargers, being able to have. And so one of the products, I can't go like into super details because I don't know about like confidentiality, but one of them was like solving some of those problems and pain points with EV. And so like it did like a lot of customer research, and there's still like there's something called range anxiety. So like, can I trust it? But then there's also a lot of other issues like if I'm buying this vehicle that totally relies on the battery, what happens when that battery goes dead? Like, can it get repaired? Like, how do repairs of EVs happen? Like, I know how they work with ICE vehicles, but like that trust with consumers. So that's one thing to overcome.
So if you, in that regard, for those two problems, do you do a brainstorm? I mean, you go through this process with those questions, and then do you have a brainstorm of ideas and test and
Yep. We think of like those responses we got, those are like raw materials, and we start like putting them on a whiteboard and putting them on like a customer journey. And then we start, when you have this like kind of like this journey of problems to solve, then it makes ideation on solutions like way easier.
Yeah, just follow up on just how long does that process take? You know, like ideally.
If you're like hardcore focused on it, I mean, it takes like less than a week. But if you're just kind of doing it like bits and pieces, like it could take like several weeks. So she breaks it up into like 3 main sections. Like she calls them a discovery sprint, a design sprint, and then a validation sprint. So you're like doing these 3 activities. Okay, one more question, and then I think we have to, I'm getting like signals to like stop.
Yeah,
Okay.
one quick question. So, as you know, games are very addictive in
Yeah.
nature. So, how does game thinking think about digital well-being and not too much?
Addictiveness to it.
Yeah.
I don't know if she actually discusses that. I mean, I thought like, because I know what you're saying, like where you get addicted to Facebook and YouTube and whatnot, like how is that dangerous? But I guess like one thing, I always bring it back to like you're building these addictive habits to help people solve a problem, not like just to have like them glued to your app, right? And so think about that and put that in perspective of like solving a problem that's in their lives. All right, like I'd love to connect with anybody if you have any more questions, but thank you for coming.